This week, Kenya hosted the Africa-France Summit, what was termed as Africa Forward Summit. According to President William Ruto,
I want to congratulate President Macron for having the courage to recalibrate the relationship between Africa and France, to make it more inclusive, make the engagement mutually beneficial with shared responsibility. We understand as African leaders that we too have responsibilities. This relationship is not going to be one-sided. We will be expecting from France as they will be expecting from us, and they will be giving as much as we are giving. That is the win-win, mutually beneficial relationship. That relationship that President Macron is now championing, a relationship of equals, is the correct template. We have real assets. We have young people, demographic dividend. We have natural resources, energy resources. These resources count for something, and we want a balanced relationship, and that is what this Nairobi summit is about.
But according to former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua,
over the weekend and better part of the beginning of this week, William Ruto has hosted some world leaders and known African dictators to get an affirmation and a breather in the reality that he is one-term president and get a reprieve of the political pressure in the country. The African Forward Summit happening in Nairobi is just a sideshow of Mr. William Ruto to hoodwink Kenyans on the matters that affect them. But what is coming out of it is nothing for the Kenyan people.
And suddenly, the summit stopped looking like a diplomatic event and started looking like an episode of Kenyan political expose between the impeached deputy president and his former boss.
Thank you for coming. We shall tell you why Kenyans made Mr. William Ruto, a man who is the greatest disrespecter of the rule of law, the greatest human rights violator, a vicious man, a callous character, a con master and a practicing dictator on internship from Abdullah Suluhu, Yoweri Museveni, and his contemporaries from other African countries, especially the ones dining at State House now for a talk show. This is a man who in June 2024 butchered Gen Zs in their numbers, abducted others. This is the man who is a real primary responsibility bearer of the war in Darfur, where thousands of women and children are being butchered. Instead of boasting of hosting over 30 presidents in Nairobi, William Ruto must focus on solving domestic issues. 3 days ago, six Kenyans in Mandera were brutally butchered by Jubaland forces who continue to illegally occupy the Kenyan soil. 7 other Kenyans are fighting for their lives in hospital, and not a single word from William Ruto. As we speak, Mandera County remains insecure and a big threat to the peace in the Horn of Africa. This is highly occasioned by issuance of Kenyan national IDs to non-Kenyan Somalis to enable them get an easy access to passports across the world.
Rigathi Gachagua came out swinging. No fear, no filter, no hesitation. According to Gachagua, one of the biggest hidden scandals involves the Rironi Mau Summit project. A project
the Rironi Mau Summit was to get 7 billion shillings without doing anything at all. Mr. Macron, you are an accomplice in the 7 billion Kenya shillings theft from the people of Kenya.
A project that has been delayed for years. He alleged that the road has not yet been signed or built because President Ruto allegedly wanted a 17 billion shillings bribe upfront.
And as we speak, there is no contract yet for the construction of the Rironi Mau Summit Highway because Mr. William Ruto wants an upfront bribe of 17 billion Kenya shillings delivered to him in cash by CRBC. But the CRBC are demanding the contract first before they give the money, and William Ruto is demanding the money before he gives the contract. That is the situation that we are in. So,
and then Gachagua dropped another explosive
in May
statement.
2026, the Auditor General has flagged of approximately 7.3 billion Kenya shillings from the fuel levy intended for road to pay French firms for the cancellation of the Rironi-Mau Summit toll road contract. Mr. Macron, your French firms had a contract of 150 billion for a bigger scope, 200 billion on a smaller scope, creating a 50 billion fund for corruption by William Ruto and the Chinese contractors. But your biggest interest and the reason why your French firms accepted cancellation of the Rironi-Mau Summit was to get 7 billion shillings without doing anything at all. Mr. Macron, you are an accomplice in the 7 billion Kenya shillings theft from the people of Kenya. That is the money you have actually come to negotiate, not the summit that you are attending.
Mr. Macron, you came to negotiate on the 76 billion shillings that your French company stole from Kenyans and not the summit. At this point, Rigathi Gachagua seems to have made it his personal mission to challenge and possibly tarnish every political partnership or international development deal President William Ruto tries to build with foreign countries. Every time Ruto delivers a major speech or hosts an international leader, Rigathi somehow appears somewhere else with his own counter-narrative ready to run concurrently with the president's message. And surprisingly, his statements keep dominating headlines. What continues to puzzle many Kenyans is where Rigathi Gachagua gets all these stories from. He speaks with confidence, mentions timelines, dates, meetings, and alleged financial figures, almost like an insider revealing state secrets. Yet, in most cases, it provides little or no concrete evidence to fully back the claims.
And asylum seekers, the government of President has colluded with foreign governments to seize political dissidents and asylum seekers. For instance, in October 2024, 7 Turkish asylum seekers were abducted in Nairobi, in a mafia style, and brutally tortured. 4 were forcibly returned to Turkey, despite international criticism regarding the principle of non-refoulement. In October 2024, Ugandan opposition leader Dr. Kiza Besigye was abducted in Nairobi and deported to Uganda to face political charges in the U.S. In January 2025, a Tanzanian journalist, Maria Sarungi, was abducted in Nairobi and was headed to Tanzania for charges and jail under Samia Suluhu, but Kenyans stopped it. Nationals from Southern Sudan, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Rwanda have been targeted for their political activism or criticism of their home governments.
So, the question now is, should Kenyans start believing the man who was once inside the system and sat at the highest table of power, or are these carefully calculated political attacks designed to weaken and sabotage President Ruto's presidency? What has made the conversation even more intense is the emergence of alleged reports suggesting that Kenya may have lost nearly 60 billion Kenyan shillings due to cancelled or stalled infrastructure projects tied to foreign agreements. Just maybe to read some of the samples of what has been found online on the projects, the 60 billion that has already been spent, on the sample of the projects, like one, and this is an information that is found online. These are not anything, this is not anything related to my own. These were findings and findings that are found online. So we have number 1, projects with confirmed approved cancellation cost or taxpayer exposure. We have project Nairobi Nakuru Mau Summit, that is the Rironi-Mau Summit Highway, was cancelled or terminated in 2025. We have a 7.3 billion Kenya shillings official PPP report figure. Media also reported 6.2 to 6.8 billion, with the difference linked to exchange rate stroke tax equalization. Number 2, project number 2, road annuity lot 3, that is the Modogashe, Ambashweni, Samatar, Ramu in Mandera. Approved payout, that was in November 2025. Amount spent was 4.0 1.09 billion Kenyan shillings. Project 3, Road Annuity Lot 32, Alasiti, Njukini, Taveta Road. That is the 2024. That was when cancelled or terminated. Nikisoma the year, that was when it was terminated or cancelled. About 436.9 million Kenyan shillings. Move to the next one. Next project, JKIA Greenfield Terminal, cancelled in 2016. 8.9 billion final payout. Settlement reported. Later reports also cite 9.6 billion. Auditor linked reporting saying taxpayers lost over 5.4 billion, including write-offs and the launch ceremony. So it was already launched, but no project was built. It was terminated. Ketraco, Kenya-Uganda Electricity Interconnector, in a BESA contract. Contract ended in 2016, about 5.2 billion. Arbitration award, including interest and cost. Ketraco to 20 kV Nairobi Metropolitan Ring in Ambesa, I think. Cancelled 2016, about 5.1 billion Kenya shillings. Kenha Road contract breaches involving CBI International awards determined 2018 to 2021. 6.96 Kenyan shillings awarded, only about 400 million paid by June 2022 per ministry data. We move to the next one. Number 2 is cancelled stalled projects with major sunk cost but not clean cancellation penalty figures. Project, we have Anor and Kimwarer dams. Kimwarer cancelled in 2019. Aror ordered to proceed at reduced cost. Public money at risk or already paid. About 19 billion had been paid out in advance. Insurance related costs, separate records show 19.6 billion loan default exposure. Notes, not a simple cancellation penalty, it is more of failed projects. Sunk cost scandal. Business Daily reported 16.2 billion loan disbursement during the BROB. 19 billion advance payments, 11 billion insurance, and 7.2 billion contractor advance. That was a report by Business Daily. And then we also have Itare Dam, stalled, contractor bankruptcy. Government later sought it to revive a settle. Part of the wider dam debt default audit linked reports showed 3 dams default exposure reached 11.0 billion with Itare around 5.3 billion. Not clearly a cancelled project payout, but taxpayers face debt, default, and legal exposure. So those are just some of the information that is already found online when it comes to the projects and how much it was actually spent on. Like I've said, this is based on research that is found online. Whether Rigathie's claims are entirely factual or politically motivated, one thing is becoming clear: his allegations are beginning to shape public perceptions and raise uncomfortable questions about transparency, foreign deals, and how major government projects are handled behind closed doors.
Already? You're not waiting your turn.
I will make order. Excuse me, everybody. Hey! I'm sorry, guys, but it's impossible to speak about culture, to have people like that, super inspired, coming here, making a speech with such a noise. So this is a total lack of respect. So I suggest, if you want to have bilaterals or speak about somebody else, something else, you have bilateral rooms or you go outside. If you want to stay here, we listen to the people. And we play in the same game. Okay? Thank you.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is called leadership.
At one point, Macron interrupted the audience trying to silence them, and Kenyans online immediately started asking questions. Would an African president ever silence a noisy audience in France? Or was this another reminder of the power imbalance between Africa and Europe? Others defended Macron, saying he was simply appreciating the cultural performance happening at the event, while the crowd misunderstood the moment. But then again, Rigathi Gachagua came out with his own explanation for why Kenyans were making noise in the first place. And suddenly, the summit itself stopped being the headline. Rigathi became the headline. And again, we ask, was Rigathi Gachagua kicked out because he knew too much? Ama this is just a bitter ex trying to destroy his former boss? Because online, Kenyans are divided. Some people believe Rigathi is exposing hidden truths. Others think he is simply angry after falling out with Ruto. And then there are those who think the man should genuinely be checked for dementia. Because some argue that a whole president cannot waste his time recovering 7 billion shillings. Others defended France, saying French institutions do not operate like corrupt political cartels where one man simply calls the shots. But while Kenya was busy hosting Macron, other African countries have been doing completely the opposite. They have been kicking France out. According to reports by Al Jazeera, several African nations, especially in the Sahel region, have cut military ties with France, expelled French troops, and openly accused France of maintaining neo-colonial influence in Africa. Countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger all pushed French troops out after military coups and growing anti-France sentiments. And recently, even Ivory Coast and Senegal, once considered France's strongest allies in Africa, have started reducing or ending French military presence. So the question now becomes, why are African countries suddenly distancing themselves from France? For years, France maintained heavy military, political, and economic influence in many of its former colonies, especially in West Africa. France claimed its military presence was there to help African countries fight terrorism and armed insurgencies. And to be fair, France argues that its operations prevented extremist groups from completely taking over parts of Sahel regions. But many Africans began asking difficult questions. If thousands of French troops had been stationed in the region for years, why was insecurity still getting worse? Why were terrorism attacks still increasing? And why did African countries still feel economically dependent despite decades of partnership? This growing frustration slowly transformed into anger, and after coups happened in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, the new military governments immediately cut military ties with France and accused Paris of interfering in African sovereignty. Some even replaced French influence with new alliances involving Russia, Turkey, and China. And suddenly France, the same France that once dominated the region, started losing influence country by country. According to Al Jazeera, by 2025, at least 6 African countries had either expelled French troops or significantly reduced military cooperation with France. This is why Macron's latest visit to Kenya became politically interesting, because while West Africa is pushing France away, France now appears to be rebuilding influence through English-speaking African countries like Kenya. And this is exactly where Kenyan politics entered the conversation. But here is where things became interesting. This is not Macron's first visit to Kenya. 7 years ago, during Uhuru Ruto administration, Macron visited Kenya and several agreements were signed, including infrastructure and railway-related projects. When Emmanuel Macron visited Kenya in 2019, during the presidency of Uhuru Kenyatta, Kenya and France signed multi-billion shillings agreements mainly focused on transport, energy, and infrastructure. Some of the biggest agreements included the Nairobi-Rironi-Mau Expressway project involving French companies like Vinci, plans for a railway connection between Nairobi and JKIA, solar energy projects including a 40-watt solar plant in Nandi, rural bridge construction projects, electricity transmission, and sustainable urban development projects. At the time, Macron described the agreements as respectful partnership, alternative to heavy Chinese debt influence in Africa. And now, years later, the same conversations are returning again. So, after all these years, is Africa really moving forward economically, or are we simply trapped in the same old cycle wearing new suits? Debt, foreign influence, mega infrastructure projects, and question about who truly benefits. This conversation and these new agreements could have started with President Emmanuel Macron first outlining to Kenyans what was actually achieved from the previous agreements signed during Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto administration. Because how do we continue signing fresh billion shillings agreements when there is still no clear delivery report from the previous ones? Many Kenyans feel that little to nothing was fully achieved despite the massive promises made years ago. The Rironi Mau Highway project, for example, became politically controversial after years of delays, changing financial arrangements, and uncertainty surrounding its implementation. The Nairobi commuter rail modernization project has also continued to be discussed years later under the current Ruto's administration, raising questions about whether these arrangements are truly being completed or simply recycled every few years under different governments. And this is where public frustration comes in. These agreements are often presented as government-to-government partnership, yet it is the Kenyan taxpayer who eventually carries the burden through taxes, loans, and public debt. That is why many citizens believe taxpayers should also be involved in conversations surrounding such critical national agreements. Kenyans deserve transparency, timelines and accountability, and regular public updates on what was promised, what has been delivered, and how much money has already been spent. Because without public accountability, these mega project announcements risk becoming political headlines instead of real developments. But not every moment during Macron's visit was political tension. One wholesome moment stood out. Macron met Kenyan marathon legend Eliud Kipchoge, went for a morning run together and toured schools together. And something very interesting happened.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Most of the students and even adults rushed to take selfies with Eliud Kipchoge instead of Macron. And honestly, that moment said everything. Kenyans chose their own legend over global headlines, history over hype. At the end of the day, whether Rigathi is exposing corruption, seeking revenge, or simply staying politically relevant, one thing is clear. This summit exposed how deeply Kenyans distrust politics, foreign deals, and powerful leaders. And until transparency becomes normal, every handshake between African leaders and foreign presidents will always come with suspension. So, what do you think? Is Rigathi Gachagua exposing the truth? Or is this just a political bitterness disguised as patriotism? Make sure to comment down below. I'll see you on the next one.